The woman I was when I thought I knew better, a confession in real time. I'm not telling you this because I want your sympathy. I'm telling you this because I owe someone the truth, and the only person I can still tell it to is myself and whoever is listening. Part 1, How I Chose Him. I'm going to tell you exactly how I chose Nathan Cole because I think the choosing is the most honest thing in this entire story, and I want to start with honesty even if I'm going to run out of it before the end. I was 28 years old. I was living in Denver, Colorado, working as a regional account manager for a pharmaceutical distributor, making decent money for the first time in my life after 3 years of scraping through the post-college gap years that nobody warns you about. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Cap Hill, a car I was almost done paying off, and a string of relationships behind me that had all had the same basic structure, exciting beginning, some period of genuine connection, then a slow unraveling as the man in question turned out to be either unavailable in some way that I had ignored in the beginning, or available in ways that I came to find dull. I was done with exciting. That is what I told myself. I was done with the men who kept you guessing, and I was ready for someone who would simply be there reliably and without drama and build something real with me. Nathan was 25 when I met him at a friend's birthday dinner in Cherry Creek. He had just finished a master's in data science, was 3 months into a job at a tech company in the River North Art District, and looked at me across the table with an expression that I can only describe as completely unguarded. He wasn't performing. He wasn't managing the impression he was making. He just looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. And I remember thinking, this is safe. This is someone who will not do what the others did. What? That is a terrible reason to start a relationship. I know that now. At 28, I told myself it was maturity. Nathan was kind, genuinely structurally kind, not the performative kindness of a man who holds doors open in public and ignores you in private, but the daily life kind that shows up in how he treated the barista and remembered your coworker's name after hearing it once and apologized when he was wrong without being asked. He was attentive in the specific way of someone who has been told all his life that paying attention to people is a virtue and believed it. He was also, if I am being completely honest about the earliest version of my thinking, someone I did not have to worry about. I am saying this plainly because I think the plain saying is important. Nathan had no game. He had not dated much before me. His social circle was small and mostly male and mostly technical. The women he had been interested in before me had, by his account, been only intermittently interested back. When he met me, he was, there is no better word for it, smitten. And the smittenness was completely apparent and completely without calculation. After 3 years of men who made me work for their attention, Nathan's transparent devotion felt like an answer. I should have asked myself whether an answer was what I actually needed or whether I was just tired of the question. I did not ask myself this. I told myself I had grown up. We dated for a year and a half. He proposed at a restaurant in low-dough, elaborate flowers, a speech he had clearly written and practiced, and I said yes with the specific quality of feeling that I have since come to understand is not joy, but relief. Relief that the instability was over. Relief that someone good wanted me enough to ask. Relief that I had found the stable landing I had been circling toward. I said yes, and I meant it, and I also remember looking around the restaurant that night and having a single clear thought, is this it? I did not say this out loud. I told myself it was pre-wedding jitters. I put the thought somewhere I could not easily find it and went home and called my mother and told her I was engaged. Part 2, the testing. I want to tell you about the testing because it is the part of the story that I am most ashamed of. and therefore the part most worth telling. I tested Nathan before I agreed to commit to him. Not consciously at first, or rather, I told myself it was not conscious at first, which is a different thing. I was late to our early dates 15-20 minutes to see whether he would be annoyed. He wasn't. He would be waiting with the particular patient attention of someone who had decided to simply be in the moment until I arrived. And he would look up when I came in and smile as if my arrival was the event he'd been organizing his evening around. I told myself this patience was a virtue. I did not ask whether the patience was something I had the right to collect evidence of. I canceled plans on short notice twice in the first month. Genuine reasons both times. One was a work thing, one was a friend who needed me, but I noted his response with the careful attention of a researcher. He rescheduled without complaint. He said no problem. Whenever works for you. I told myself this flexibility was attractive. I did not tell myself that I was collecting data on how much I could take without consequence. After we were married 2.5 years in a small ceremony in the Denver Botanic Gardens in May with 40 people, which was beautiful and real and made me cry in a way that surprised me after we were married, I started noticing things I had not allowed myself to notice before the commitment was made. Nathan wanted to know about my day in a way I began to experience as surveillance rather than interest. He wanted to make plans for the weekend before the weekend had started, which I found suffocating. He wanted to discuss our finances together every month, sitting at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet, which I found infantilizing. I told myself I found these things because I had discovered them after the commitment. I did not tell myself that these things had been there the whole time and I had been choosing not to look at them. Here's the truth. Nathan did not change after we were married. I changed what I was willing to see. I built a case against him, not in a document, not with any intention, just in my head, running and updating itself a ledger of evidence. For the argument, I was slowly writing that Nathan was not enough, that the kindness was weakness, that the predictability was dullness, that the patience I had found reassuring was actually evidence of a character that had never learned to push back. The case was almost entirely false. I know that now. At the time, the case felt like clarity. Part 3, Lucas. His name was Lucas Hale. He was 34, worked in commercial real estate, drove a truck he'd modified himself, and wore the modification casually, the way that men who are comfortable in their own skin wear everything. He sat across from me at a client dinner that my company hosted in a private room at a restaurant on Larimer Square, and he argued with me about the projected impact of a hospital system acquisition on pharmaceutical distribution in the region, and he was wrong about 2 of his 3 points and completely right about the third, and he told me when I said so. Nathan never argued with me. When I expressed an opinion, he listened and considered and either agreed or found a diplomatic way to say he had a different perspective. This was objectively better behavior than interrupting and arguing. I found it less interesting. Lucas interrupted. Lucas argued. When I made a point he hadn't thought of, he stopped and actually recalibrated in real time, not to agree with me necessarily, but to integrate the information and keep going from the new position. It felt like a conversation rather than a presentation. It felt like being met. I told myself this was intellectual engagement. It was also, if I am being honest, attraction, and I knew it was attraction before I told myself it was anything else. We exchanged cards at the end of the dinner under the professional justification that his company managed properties that my clients occupied. This was true. It was not the reason we exchanged cards. I want to be precise about the timeline because I think precision is the only form of honesty available to me here. At the time I met Lucas, my marriage was 14 months old and had been, by most external measures, fine. Nathan and I had settled into a routine that functioned. We split domestic labor reasonably. We had a social life. We had a sex life that was, and I am going to say this plainly because I think the plain saying is important, adequate. Not bad, not broken, adequate. I had chosen adequate. I had chosen it deliberately at 28 when I decided I was done with excitement and ready for stability. And for the first year, adequate had felt like exactly what I needed. By the time I met Lucas, adequate had started feeling like settling, and I had started building the case against Nathan without realizing that the case was not about Nathan at all. It was about me and about what I wanted and about whether I was willing to have the honest conversation that would have been the only appropriate response to wanting something different. I was not willing to have that conversation. I had coffee with Lucas 3 weeks after the dinner, under the professional justification that he was interested in discussing a possible referral relationship. This was not entirely false. It was also not the reason I said yes. Part 4, the open relationship. I need to tell you what I did before I tell you what happened next, because I think this is the part that most clearly demonstrates who I was then and who I am still trying not to be. 2 months after meeting Lucas, I proposed to Nathan that we open our marriage. I framed it, and I want you to notice the word framed, which I am using deliberately because framing is what I was doing as a conversation about growth and autonomy and the specific limitations of monogamy as a structure for long-term partnership. I brought articles, I brought a book, I suggested a therapist who specialized in non-traditional relationship structures. What I did not bring was honesty about why I was asking. The honest version of the conversation would have been, I have met someone who makes me feel things I'm not feeling in our marriage, and I don't know whether that means our marriage is broken or whether it means I am, but I think I need to tell you about it before I do something we can't come back from. That conversation would have been terrifying to have. It would have required me to be wrong in front of the person who loved me most. It would have required me to ask for something without framing it as something Nathan should want for himself. I was not prepared to do that, so I framed. Nathan resisted. He was not equipped by temperament, by experience, by the specific way he understood love to absorb this without taking it as a referendum on his sufficiency. He said as much. He asked me directly whether this was about someone specific. I said no. This was a lie. I have thought about this lie many times since. I spent 4 months wearing him down. Those are his words from a conversation we had 2 years later, and they are accurate. I brought new articles. I suggested the therapist again, and eventually he agreed to go. I introduced language around personal growth and relationship evolution and the limitations of possessive models of partnership. And I deployed this language with the precision of someone who has spent 4 months deciding what she wants and building the argument for it. Nathan agreed eventually, not because he believed in it, because he loved me enough to try something I wanted, even when it cost him. I want to say that again, he loved me enough to try something that cost him in order to give me something I wanted. And what I did with that gift was use it to build the life I was building anyway, without telling him about it. This is the part of the story I can't make comfortable. I have tried. There is no framing that makes it comfortable. It is what it is. Part 5, what the open relationship actually was. Here is what the open relationship actually was. It was a structure designed by me, primarily for me, that gave me access to Lucas, while technically remaining within the bounds of honesty because I had disclosed the arrangement even if I had not disclosed the reason for it. It was an arrangement that I had known from the first conversation would be asymmetric because I could easily find partners and Nathan couldn't. And I had constructed the asymmetry deliberately while telling myself it was not deliberate. Nathan's experience of the open relationship was the following. He updated his dating profile and received over 3 months a total of perhaps 12 matches, of which 3 responded to messages. Of those 3, one met him for coffee and didn't message him again. One exchanged messages for 2 weeks and then went quiet. One went on 2 dates with him, and he told me carefully that he had enjoyed her company, but that it hadn't felt right. My experience of the open relationship was the following. Within a week of updating my profile, I had a full calendar. I was selective. I want to be honest that I was selective, not because I was being reasonable, but because I had Lucas and was primarily using the additional dates as cover and variety. I went out with 4 other men in the first 2 months, none of whom I was seriously interested in, all of whom made me feel the specific quality of being found attractive by people who had not committed to finding me important, which is a feeling that I had been chasing for the entire conversation about opening the marriage. I would come home from these dates and tell Nathan about them in the name of the honest communication that was supposed to be the foundation of our arrangement. He would listen. This is the word that comes back to me when I think about his face during those conversations, stoic. He had decided to be brave about something that was costing him significantly, and the bravery looked, from the outside, like composure. I told myself the composure meant he was adjusting. I did not ask whether the stoicism was pain. Lucas and I were seeing each other once or twice a week by this point. We had moved past the professional justification into something neither of us had formally named, which is a thing that people do when they want to maintain plausible deniability about what they're doing. He knew about Nathan. He did not ask about Nathan. The not asking suited me because I could tell myself that what we had was contained and separate and not a commentary on my marriage. This was incorrect. What we had was a direct commentary on my marriage. The commentary was that I was choosing it. Part 6, Priya. Nathan met Priya Sharma through work. She was a data analyst at a company that his firm had been brought in to consult for, and he mentioned her for the first time in October, casually, the way you mention a colleague. She'd made a good point in the meeting. She had an interesting background in statistical modeling. I noted the mention with the peripheral attention I was applying to Nathan's life at that point, which was not my full attention, and filed it away. The second mention was in November. She had caught an error in the client's data that would have cost them significantly, and Nathan described this with the specific animated quality he had when he found genuine competence attractive. And I want to be precise here. Nathan found competence attractive in people, regardless of gender. And the specific warmth in his description of Priya's work was the same warmth he used when he talked about a colleague he admired. I had heard this warmth before directed at male colleagues. I had not tracked it then. I tracked it now. The third mention was when he asked if it would be okay to have her join us for dinner with a group of friends in December. He said it casually, and I said, of course, and I spent the 2 weeks between the asking and the dinner doing something that I am not proud of, which was assessing Priya Sharma's LinkedIn profile and Instagram, and the general shape of her professional and personal presence, with the focus of a woman who was trying to establish whether someone posed a threat. She was 30, a year younger than Nathan, with a direct professional manner and a face that was striking without performing striking. At the dinner, she was warm and funny and asked Nathan questions about his work with the specific interested attention that I recognized. I recognized it because it was the attention Lucas gave me. The attention of someone who was interested in what you actually thought rather than what you were performing. Nathan was different that evening. Not dramatically different, not the animated restaurant version of himself that I would eventually see much later and much too late. But there were moments in the conversation where he was less careful than he was with me, less managed. Moments where he made a joke without checking whether it landed, and the joke landed, and he laughed along with it rather than waiting to see if it was okay. I drove home that night and said almost nothing, and Nathan asked if I was tired, and I said yes. I was not tired. I was watching my husband be more comfortable with someone he had met 3 months ago than he had been with me in at least 2 years of marriage, and I was processing what that meant, and the processing was making me feel something I did not want to feel, which was, this is what I did to him. He learned to be careful with me because I made being careless cost something. And Priya hadn't done that yet, so he got to be himself. I did not say any of this. I said I was tired and went to bed. Part 7, what I did with what I knew. Nathan and Priya became friends. That is the accurate description of what happened over the following months. They had coffee to debrief after the consulting project ended. They texted not constantly, but regularly. The specific frequency of two people who had found they liked each other's company and were finding ways to maintain the finding. Nathan was transparent about it. Transparent in the specific way of someone who had been told transparency was the rule and was following the rule genuinely. I made this into a problem. I want to be careful about how I describe this because the easy version is that I was hypocritically jealous that I was having an affair and resenting my husband for having a friendship. The easy version is true, but it's not the complete truth. The complete truth is more embarrassing. I was angry because Nathan was happy. Not happy because of Priya specifically, or not only that, happy in a way that I had not seen him be in at least a year, and the happiness was coming from somewhere I had not supplied and was not controlling. The spreadsheet conversations were still happening, but they had a different quality. He was less careful about whether I was engaged. He had started going to the climbing gym on Saturday mornings, which was something he had suggested we try together twice, and I had declined. He was reading again actual books in a way he hadn't been doing since the early months of the marriage, when I had been too busy manufacturing a case against stability to notice what stability actually looked like. Nathan was building a life that fit him better than the one we had been building together. And he was building it with my knowledge and my supposed approval because I had been the one to structure the arrangement that gave both of us latitude. I had structured the arrangement specifically so that I could do what I was doing. And now Nathan was doing something with his portion of the latitude that I had not accounted for, which was becoming more himself. I confronted him about Priya in February, 8 months after I had introduced the open relationship concept, 5 months after I had been seeing Lucas consistently. I said that what was happening with Priya felt like an emotional affair. I used that exact phrase, emotional affair. Nathan looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he said very quietly, "Is what we have with Priya different from what you have with Lucas?" I said it was completely different because what I had with Lucas had been disclosed and structured and was within the agreed framework of our arrangement. Nathan said, "The framework was your idea. I agreed to it because you wanted it. And now I'm being told the way I'm using it is wrong. I said that was not what I was saying. He looked at me with the patient attention I had spent 2 years cataloging as evidence of dullness, and he said, "What are you saying then?" I did not have a good answer. I said I was saying that I was worried about us and that I needed us to talk more and that I felt like we were growing apart. All of these things were true. None of them were the thing I actually needed to say, which was, I am afraid that you are happy without me in a way that suggests you were unhappy with me, and I don't know what to do with that fear. Nathan nodded. He said he also felt like we were growing apart. He said he thought we should go back to the therapist. I agreed. We went back to the therapist. The therapist asked us each separately what we wanted from the marriage. Nathan said he wanted a partner who was genuinely present and interested in building something together rather than someone who was present in body and somewhere else in attention. He did not say this angrily. He said it the way he said everything carefully, precisely, with the specific quality of a person who has thought about something for a long time and has arrived at what they actually think. The therapist asked me the same question. I said I wanted passion. I said I wanted to feel chosen, not defaulted to. I said I wanted someone who pushed back. The therapist looked at both of us. She said, "Have you told each other these things directly?" We both said no. She said, "Why not?" Nathan said he had been afraid of what my answer would be. I said I had been afraid of what it would mean about the marriage if I named it. The therapist said that was the conversation we needed to have and that she would be there when we were ready to have it. We left the session and drove home, and neither of us had the conversation. Part 8, the end of the marriage. The marriage ended the way most things I had built incorrectly ended, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, clear understanding that the structure was not going to hold. Nathan filed. Not me, Nathan. This surprised me more than I had expected it to, which says something about how thoroughly I had turned him into a character in my story rather than a person with his own. He told me on a Sunday morning in March, sitting at the kitchen table, where the spreadsheet conversations had happened with the specific stillness of someone who has made a decision and is now implementing it. He said he had been thinking about what he wanted from the marriage and what the marriage had been and whether those things were the same thing, and he had concluded they were not. Concluded, and he thought we both deserved better than what we were doing to each other. He was not angry. He was not theatrical. He was Nathan measured precise kind, even in the ending. I asked him if it was because of Priya. He said, "It's because of us. Priya made me understand what I wasn't getting, but she didn't create the absence." I asked what that meant. He said, "I've been present in this marriage for 2 years. You've been present in body. It's not the same thing. And I think you know that." I did know that. We divided everything with the specific logistical competence of two organized people who no longer trusted each other but still respected each other's efficiency. The apartment, the furniture, the car, the joint account. Nathan took the furniture he had brought from his previous apartment before we moved in together. I kept the place. He found a 1-bedroom in Washington Park that was 2 blocks from the climbing gym. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in June. We signed the papers in a law office on Colfax and shook hands in the parking lot, and I drove back to Cap Hill alone. Lucas met me for dinner that evening. He had ordered wine by the time I arrived, and he looked at me across the table with the particular assessing attention I had spent a year and a half finding electric, and he said, "So, what now?" And I said I didn't know. He said, I've been thinking, now that you're not married, things are technically different, but I don't know that they need to be different. I like what we have. I said, "What do we have?" He said, "Something good, something that works. I don't think we need to put a label on it." I looked at Lucas across the dinner table in the restaurant on Larimer Square, where we had first argued about pharmaceutical distribution, and I felt something shift, not dramatically, just a small adjustment in how I was seeing him, the way your eyes adjust when the light changes. He didn't want to label it. He liked what we had. He did not want things to be different. I had ended my marriage for a man who wanted to keep me in the category we had been in before the marriage ended. I finished my wine and paid my half of the bill and drove home. Part 9, what Lucas was. I want to tell you what Lucas actually was because I spent a year and a half telling myself he was something specific, and it turned out to be a partial picture. Lucas was and is probably somewhere exactly what he presented himself to be: confident, decisive, someone who pushed back. He argued because he was genuinely interested in his own opinion and occasionally in mine. He did not ask what I wanted to order because he trusted his own taste and assumed I would tell him if he was wrong. He made plans without consulting me because his plans were his and he expected mine to be mine. None of this was pretense. It was also, as I eventually understood, not interest in building something together. It was interest in two parallel lives that intersected pleasantly and without obligation. The qualities I found electric were the qualities of a person who was genuinely self-sufficient and genuinely uninterested in interdependence. I had confused self-sufficiency with self-possession. I had confused the absence of need for the presence of strength. Lucas didn't need me because Lucas didn't really need anyone in the daily structural way that people need each other when they're actually building a life together. He needed his own company and occasional interesting companions and a professional life that was going well. I was, for 18 months, an interesting companion. After the divorce, I was a complication. Not a cruel complication. Lucas was not unkind about it, but a complication. The framing shifted when I was no longer married. The marriage had been the container that made our dynamic work for him. It limited what I could ask for, which meant he never had to decide whether he wanted to give it. When the container was removed, the dynamic had nowhere to go. We stayed together in the frictionless way that relationships without clear structures stay together for 4 more months after the divorce. In those 4 months, I watched the things I had found exciting about Lucas slowly reorganize into things I recognized from before Nathan. The spontaneity was real, but it was specifically spontaneity about his own plans, not about our life. The confidence was real, but it was confidence in his own judgment, not particularly in mine. The pushing back was real, and it was good, but it was not the same as being genuinely interested in what I thought. I had left a marriage with a man who was too interested in what I thought and entered a relationship with a man who was not interested enough. I had been looking for a specific setting on a dial, and I had been so focused on the setting that I had not noticed I was measuring the wrong thing. Part 10, Priya. I found out about Nathan and Priya through mutual friends, the way you find out about things when your social circles still overlap, but you are no longer inside the information network of someone's daily life. They were together. Officially, publicly, the kind of together that gets announced on social media with a joint photograph and warm comments from people who have been watching and hoping for the announcement. I saw the photograph on a Saturday morning 4 months after my divorce was finalized, sitting in my Cap Hill apartment with coffee, and I sat with it for a long time. Priya had her arm through Nathan's in the photograph. Not dramatically, not the performative intimacy of a couple proving something, just casually the way people touch when they're comfortable, when they're not thinking about whether they should be touching. Nathan was smiling. The smile was the one I remembered from the early months of our relationship, the unguarded one. The one that happened before he learned to check whether smiling was appropriate. She'd brought it back, or rather, he had found it with her, which is probably the more accurate framing. I put the phone down and made more coffee and looked out the window at the Cap Hill Street and tried to identify what I was feeling. And what I was feeling was the specific quality of someone who has walked away from a meal, decided they weren't hungry, and is standing outside the restaurant watching other people eat what they left behind. Not jealousy, exactly. Not grief for Nathan specifically. Something more complicated, which was the recognition that what Nathan and Priya had was something that Nathan and I could theoretically have had, that the same man in different circumstances with a different version of me had access to this specific warmth, and that I had systematically removed the conditions that would have allowed it to exist between us. I had taken a person who was capable of this warmth and convinced him over 2 years that careful was the only option, and then I had left because careful felt like dullness. The warmth was always there. I had covered it with my own behavior and then blamed its absence on him. Part 11, seeing them. I ran into them at a restaurant in the Highlands neighborhood 8 months after the divorce. I was there with a friend. Not a romantic situation, just dinner, which is what my social life had reorganized into a series of dinners with friends while I tried to figure out what I was doing with the larger structure. The restaurant was the kind of place Nathan and I had talked about going to when it opened and had never gotten around to. I had been meaning to try it. I had not anticipated running into them. They were at a table near the back, the kind of corner table that restaurants give to people who look like they're there to be present with each other rather than to be seen. I noticed Nathan first, the specific way he was sitting, leaning slightly forward, animated. The version of himself that I had watched him bring out more frequently in the last year of our marriage at work, events, and dinners where I was not the focal point of his attention. He was telling Priya something. She was listening with the complete attention. I recognized the attention that he had once given me across tables at restaurants before I had taught him to modulate it, to check it, to offer it carefully in measured portions. She was receiving it unmodulated. They didn't see me for perhaps 5 minutes. I watched them without meaning to, not with any intention, just with the specific paralysis of a person who has walked into a room and immediately understands that the room contains something they cannot look away from. Nathan laughed at something, a real laugh, unmanaged, the kind he used to have before he became careful. Priya said something back, and he tilted his head in the specific way he had when he was considering something seriously and finding it interesting, and then he laughed again. When he finally looked up and saw me, there was a moment, a half second, where something moved across his face that I could not fully read. Not pain, not resentment, something like the flicker of a resolved question, and then it resolved, and he gave me the specific smile of a person who genuinely wishes you well and has moved past the things that would have complicated the wishing. He waved. I waved back. Priya, when Nathan introduced us, was warm in the way that people are warm when they are secure, not performing generosity, not managing the interaction, just present. She said she had heard good things. I did not ask what things. She asked how I was doing and meant it with the specific quality of a person who asks questions. They're prepared to hear honest answers too. Nathan mentioned he'd been promoted, that he'd started hiking. Priya liked hiking, apparently, and had gotten him into it. That they were looking at a place in Washington Park. I said that was wonderful and meant it, which surprised me. I had expected to feel the sharp, specific jealousy of loss, What I felt instead was something more like the feeling of seeing a photograph from a trip you declined to take and understanding that the trip was beautiful and that your decision not to go was also yours. I had declined to take the trip. It was beautiful without me. Both things were true. I said it was good to see them. I said goodbye and went back to my friend's table and ate my dinner and tried to identify what the evening had actually changed, which was nothing, and also something I did not yet have the language for. Part 12, what I know. I have been living in Denver for 11 months since the divorce. I have my apartment, my job, my friends, a smaller circle than before. But real, I have been on some dates, none of which have been significant. I have been going to therapy with a therapist who is direct and does not let me use my own articulateness as a hiding place. Lucas and I ended cleanly in the way that things end when neither party has invested enough to make the ending messy. He sent a text. I responded. We have not spoken since. Occasionally, I see a LinkedIn update about his professional development and feel precisely nothing, which is its own kind of information. Nathan and Priya posted photographs from Colorado's high country in September. They were at a trailhead at elevation, both of them with the specific wind-flushed look of people who have been outdoors for hours. Nathan had a backpack I did not recognize and a hiking pole and an expression of someone who has found something they hadn't known they were missing. They looked like actual partners in the specific sense of people who are moving through the same terrain at the same pace. I looked at that photograph for a long time and tried to be honest with myself about what I felt. What I felt was this: I had looked at Nathan's devotion and called it dullness. I had looked at his patience and called it weakness. I had looked at his desire to build something with me and called it an obstacle to what I actually wanted. And what I actually wanted, it turned out, was a specific feeling, excitement, the sense of being found interesting, the electric quality of attention that didn't feel guaranteed, and I had been so focused on the feeling that I had not noticed the building coming down while I chased it. Nathan had been offering me a foundation. I had been looking for a weather event. Weather events feel more alive. They are also not something you build anything on. I am 34 years old, which is old enough to know better, and young enough that I keep having to remind myself I could still be doing better than I am. I am in therapy because I am trying to understand what I was actually looking for and why I looked for it in the places I looked. And the understanding is coming slowly in the way that useful understanding tends to come. It is not comfortable and it is not redemptive. It is just accurate, and accuracy is I am learning the beginning of something rather than the end. Part 13, the inventory and what it was actually measuring. I want to tell you about the inventory I maintained against Nathan because I think naming it clearly is the closest I can get to an honest accounting. The inventory was a list of Nathan's failures as a husband and a person, the things that were not enough, the things that proved the marriage was a mistake, the things that justified what I was doing and planning to do. I ran this list in my head for approximately 18 months, updating it regularly, reviewing it when I felt guilty about Lucas or about the framing I had done around the open relationship or about the way I was treating the person who had trusted me enough to try something that cost him because I wanted it. The inventory included his patience with me, weakness, his desire to plan ahead, lack of spontaneity, his interest in my day, clinginess, his emotional transparency, immaturity, his consistent devotion, inability to keep me interested. Here is what the honest version of the inventory would have included instead. His patience with me was patience, not weakness. Patience. The same quality that I would find 2 years later, completely absent in Lucas, and experience as disappointment. His desire to plan ahead was an attempt to build a shared life rather than two parallel lives that sometimes overlapped. This was, I now understand, something I had said I wanted at 28 and had stopped being able to receive by 30. His interest in my day was genuine interest in me as a person, the daily practice of caring about someone's specific experience of their specific life. I had cataloged it as surveillance. It was love in the particular idiom of a person who showed love by paying attention. His consistent devotion was exactly what I had chosen him for and had then decided was boring. The thing I had found reassuring at 28 and found suffocating at 30 was the same thing. I had changed the label. I had not asked whether the label change was an accurate reassessment or a self-serving one. Every item in the inventory was real. The interpretation was wrong. The inventory was not a document of Nathan's failures. It was a document of my changing mind, and instead of acknowledging that my mind had changed and having the honest conversation about what that meant, I had used the inventory to build the case that he had failed rather than that I had grown or changed or wanted something different. He had not failed. I had changed the requirements and blamed him for not meeting them. Part 14, the sister conversation. My sister Adrienne called me in August, 3 months after the divorce. Adrienne is 4 years older than me, lives in Boulder with her husband and their daughter, and has the specific quality of a person who delivers difficult truths without decoration, but also without cruelty. She has been doing this my whole life. I have not always appreciated it. She asked how I was doing. I gave her the version I had been giving everyone, adjusting, figuring things out, taking things one day at a time. The language of someone who is processing something without telling you what they are actually processing. She listened to this version and then said, "Are you going to tell me what actually happened?" I told her. Not the framed version, the actual version, the one I had been telling to my therapist in pieces, and that I had not yet told to anyone I loved because I had not been ready for someone I loved to hear it. I told her about the testing, the choosing because he was safe, the inventory, the framing of the open relationship, Lucas, the thing I did with what I knew about Priya. Adrienne was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "How long did you know that what you were doing was wrong?" I said, "I think I knew from the beginning." She said, "So why did you keep going?" I thought about this for a long time. The honest answer was not a flattering one. I said, because stopping would have meant admitting I had made a mistake at 28 when I thought I was being mature, and it would have meant telling Nathan the truth, and the truth would have meant being someone who had used his trust to do something that hurt him, and I wasn't ready to be that person. "But you were already being that person," Adrienne said. "Yes," I said. "I know." "The difference between the two versions of that person," she said, "is whether you told the truth." She was right. The difference between who I was and who I could have been was a single conversation, the honest one, the one I had been too afraid to have. If I had had that conversation, the outcome might have been the same, the marriage might have ended, Nathan and I might have agreed that what we had was not what either of us actually needed, but the ending would have been honest. Nathan would have had the choice to stay or go based on what was actually happening, rather than being managed out of a marriage by someone who was making decisions for him under the guise of having given him the choice. I robbed him of the honest conversation. I robbed him of the choice. I told myself I was protecting him from something, and what I was actually doing was protecting myself from the consequences of telling the truth. That is what the inventory was in service of. That is what the open relationship framing was in service of. All of it, the whole structure I had built, was in service of protecting myself from having to be honest about who I was and what I wanted in a way that would have required me to be vulnerable to the person who loved me most. I was a coward, and the cowardice cost him 2 years. Part 15, what I am still figuring out. I am 34 years old, and I am still figuring out what I want in the specific way that people are still figuring out what they want when they have not yet been willing to sit with the question, honestly. I wanted excitement. I wanted to feel chosen. I wanted the electric quality of attention that had to be earned rather than given. These were real wants, and I am not going to tell you they were wrong to have, but I confused wanting these things with evidence that the person I was with was failing to provide them, rather than with evidence that I had not told that person they were what I needed. Nathan did not know I needed to be argued with. I had watched him stop arguing with me and rewarded the stopping by reducing my criticism. And he had learned from the reward structure I had built that the correct behavior was to not argue. I had trained him to be what I later called dull, and then used the dullness I had trained him toward as evidence that he was wrong for me. Wrong for. This is the thing that my therapist has spent the most time on, the question of whether I am capable of identifying what I actually want and communicating it to someone before I turn their inability to provide it into evidence of their insufficiency. The answer so far is I am getting better at the identifying. The communicating is harder. The communicating requires me to be willing to be wrong about what I want, and to hear that what I want is not available, and to sit with that rather than managing around it. I am practicing sitting with things. This is less exciting than what I was doing before. I believe it is also more honest. Nathan and Priya are buying the house in Washington Park. I saw this on Instagram. Priya posted a photograph of the door with a key in it and a caption that said something brief and warm. Nathan was in the background, slightly out of focus, holding a box of their things. I looked at this photograph for a long time, and I felt I want to be accurate about what I felt a specific kind of grief that was not for Nathan, not for the marriage, but for the version of myself that could have been at that door with him. Not because it would have been right. I don't know if it would have been right. But because the version of myself that could have been there was a version that was honest, and the version that actually ended up standing on a different street in a different city was the version that was not. I chose wrong. I know how I chose wrong. I know the first decision that led to the next one, that led to the one after that. I know the name of each decision and what I told myself each one was justified by, and what it was actually justified by, which was fear of vulnerability, fear of asking for what I needed, fear of being wrong in front of someone who loved me. I was afraid. And the fear cost someone I genuinely cared about 2 years of his life. He got better from it. He found Priya and Washington Park and high country trails and the unguarded version of himself that I had covered over with my behavior until he had not been able to find it with me. I am still looking for the version of myself that asks for what I need instead of building the case that I need something different. Some days I find her. Some days I find the old version instead, the one with the inventory and the framing, the one who chooses safety and calls it wisdom, and then resents the safety. I am trying. I am in Denver, in my apartment in Cap Hill, with my job and my friends and my therapist, and the specific project of becoming someone who can be honest with the person they love before the honesty costs them both something they can't recover. That is the story. That is all of it. I did not tell it well enough to make myself sympathetic. I told it well enough to make it true. That will have to be enough. That is what I have to start from. Done. Cast of characters. The narrator 34, Denver. Account manager. The woman who chose Nathan for the wrong reason built the case against him for the wrong reason and is now sitting with the right reason 2 years too late. She is trying. She is not all the way there. She is still in Denver. Nathan Cole, 32. Data scientist, married the narrator at 25 and spent 2 years becoming careful with someone who had taught him that carelessness had costs. Now living in Washington Park with Priya. Hiking. Promoted twice. Found the unguarded version of himself that the narrator had covered over. He is fine. He deserved to be fine sooner. Lucas Hale, 36. Commercial real estate. Everything the narrator thought she wanted. Confident, decisive, interesting, impossible to build anything real with. He wanted an interesting companion. He got one for 18 months. He moved on. He was exactly what he presented himself as, and the narrator is the one who misread the presentation. Priya Sharma, 32, data analyst. She received Nathan the way the narrator had not been able to receive him fully without the inventory, without the case. She is warm and genuine and apparently very good at hiking. She is building the life in Washington Park that the narrator walked away from. She deserves it. Adrian, the narrator's sister, 4 years older, lives in Boulder, asks the question that gets to the center. Does not let the articulateness be a hiding place. The therapist does not let the articulateness be a hiding place either. Working on it. Part 16, the wedding photograph. There is a photograph from my wedding that I have been thinking about for 11 months. It is not a photograph anyone else would notice. It is not the first dance or the ceremony or the table of people I love. It is a candid shot taken during the dinner portion of the reception, Nathan and I at the head table mid-conversation, and my face is angled slightly away from him, towards something happening at another table. Nathan is looking at me. I am not looking at him. My photographer gave me a gallery of 412 photographs. I have looked at this one more than any other. Nathan's expression in this photograph is the specific expression of a person who is looking at someone they love and finding them temporarily elsewhere. Not hurt. He wasn't hurt then, not in any way he had words for. Just the slightly patient, slightly waiting quality of someone who has gotten used to their person being mostly present and occasionally not, and has made their peace with the ratio. I did not notice on our wedding day that he had already made his peace with that ratio, that he had already 12 months into knowing me, adjusted to the version of presence I was offering, and decided it was enough. I did not notice because I was looking at the other table. I am the person who was looking at the other table. I have been the person looking at the other table for most of my adult life. The other table is always more interesting because it is not the table I am. At the table I am at is the one with the commitment, the history, the person who knows the names of my fears. The other table is the one with the strangers who only know the version of me I am presenting. Strangers can only know the version you present. That is why they seem to appreciate it more. This is not insight. This is the kind of thing that gets written in the pages of self-help books that I used to roll my eyes at. I know. I am telling you because I need to say it out loud to someone, and I am not yet brave enough to say it to the person I should say it to. I should apologize to Nathan, not for his benefit. He does not need my apology. He is doing fine in Washington Park with his hiking poles and his unguarded smile. I should apologize because I owe him the specific acknowledgement that what I did was wrong in the particular ways that it was wrong, and that the wrongness was mine and not his. I have not done this. I think about it most weeks. I have not done it because I am still sorting out the difference between the apology that serves him and the apology that serves me, and I have not yet been sure which one I would be making. When I am sure, I will do it. I am working toward being sure. My therapist says the working toward is itself meaningful. I think she might be managing my expectations. I also think she is right. Part 17, What Stability Actually Is. Here is what I understand now about stability that I did not understand at 28 when I chose it for the wrong reasons and then abandoned it when I had mistaken its nature. Stability is not the same as dullness. I made this mistake and it cost me 2 years and a marriage, and Nathan 2 years, and however many resources it takes to rebuild yourself after someone has taught you to be careful. What I experienced as dullness in Nathan was the specific daily texture of stability, the spreadsheet, conversations, the planned weekends, the checking in on my day. These things did not feel exciting because they were not exciting. Stability is not exciting. Stability is the thing that exists so that the rest of life can be interesting without being terrifying. Stability is the structure under the building. I had wanted the building to be the interesting part. I had wanted the foundation to also be the skyline. I had been confused about which was which, and in that confusion, I had knocked down the foundation looking for the skyline and been surprised when the building collapsed. Lucas was the skyline. The skyline is beautiful. You cannot live in the skyline. You live in the building and you look at the skyline from it. I am trying to learn to appreciate the building. This is the lesson that arrives too late for the marriage, but possibly not too late for whatever comes next. I do not know what comes next. I am 34 in Denver, in therapy, trying to identify what I actually want versus what I want to feel, and whether I can have the thing I actually want without requiring it to also feel like the other thing at all times. My therapist says this is the central question for me, and that most people spend their whole lives not asking it directly. I take some cold comfort in the company. The company does not make my marriage any less over, or Nathan any less, in Washington Park, but it makes me feel slightly less specifically broken and slightly more broadly human. Slightly. That is enough to start from. Enough to... Part 18, Adrienne's daughter. My niece Sophie is 7 years old. She came to visit me in Denver in July with Adrienne and spent 2 days treating my apartment with the comprehensive assessment of a child deciding what she thought of a space. On the second morning, she sat at my kitchen table with her breakfast and asked me, Why are you sad? I said I wasn't sad. I was just thinking, she said. You're the kind of sad that looks like thinking. I looked at my 7-year-old niece. She said, Mom is sad sometimes, and she looks like she's thinking too, but if you ask her, she tells you what she's actually sad about. I said, What kind of sad am I? She considered, the kind where you keep looking at something that isn't there. I sat with that for a moment, then I said, What should I do about that? She thought about this seriously, in the way that children consider questions they have not been asked before. Then she said, Look at what is there. That usually helps. I looked at my kitchen table with my niece at it and the Denver morning coming through the window and my sister's voice on the phone in the other room and my coffee going cold. There was quite a lot there. I had been looking at what wasn't there for 2 years. The excitement that wasn't there, the electricity that wasn't there, the feeling of being chosen that I hadn't let myself feel because receiving it from Nathan felt too comfortable and receiving it from Lucas felt too contingent. What had been there, a person who knew my fears and stayed. A spreadsheet conversation about our shared financial life, a patient smile when I arrived late, an apology when he was wrong, the specific quality of being loved by someone who was paying attention. It was there the whole time. I was looking at what wasn't. Part 19, looking at what is. I am going to tell you something that is not a resolution and not a redemption, and is just a small thing that happened in October that I keep thinking about. Nathan emailed me, not about the divorce logistics. Those had been settled months ago, not anything significant. He had seen something about a conference related to pharmaceutical distribution and thought I might find it professionally useful and forwarded it with a single sentence, thought this might be relevant to your work. That was it. No subtext, no residual emotional charge, no performance of being over it. Just a professional forward from someone who had noticed something and thought of me because of it. I looked at that email for a long time, then I wrote back, Thank you. This is actually exactly relevant. I hope you're well. He wrote back, Doing great. Take care of yourself. That was the full exchange. I have thought about it often since because it is the smallest possible evidence of something I had not expected, which is that Nathan's generosity toward me had not ended with the marriage. He had moved on. He was doing great. He still noticed things that might be useful to me and forwarded them without calculation or performance. He was still the person I had cataloged as insufficient. I had been measuring with the wrong instrument. The instrument I was using was designed to measure excitement, and it kept registering low because excitement was not what Nathan was producing. What he was producing was something the instrument was not calibrated to measure, which was the daily practice of noticing someone and thinking of them and doing something small and useful because of the noticing. I had spent 2 years measuring with the wrong instrument and concluding the measurements were Nathan's failure. The measurements were my instrument's failure. I am trying to build a better instrument. This is slow work. It is the only work worth doing. I am 34 in Denver in Cap Hill in my apartment with its morning light and its proximity to the places where my life is. I am going to therapy. I am trying to ask for what I want before I build the case that I need something different. I am practicing looking at what is there. There is quite a lot there. I am still learning to see it. That is the beginning. That is all I have. That is For now, enough. Part 20, the last honest thing. I want to say one more thing, which is the hardest thing to say, and therefore probably the most important. I do not know whether I will do better. This is the honest version of the ending. The comfortable version is I have learned my lesson. I am in therapy. I know what I did wrong. I am going to be a different person. The comfortable version implies a trajectory, a line moving toward the person I should have been, a future in which all of this produces growth, and the growth produces something better. I do not know if that is true. I know that I am trying to ask different questions of myself than I was asking when I was 28 and 29 and 30 and 31. I know that I am sitting with the discomfort of uncertainty rather than immediately building a case for whatever reduces the discomfort most efficiently. I know that the next time I am looking at a person and beginning to catalog their insufficiencies, I am going to try to ask whether the catalog is honest assessment or whether it is the inventory again, managing the ground for the decision I have already made. I know these things. Whether knowing them will change what I do is not something I can promise. What I can tell you is that I owe Nathan Cole an honest accounting of what happened, and I am working toward being the person who can give it to him without making it about my need for absolution. When I am that person, I will tell him. He does not need the telling. He has moved on. He is in Washington Park. He is fine. But I need to have done it because the alternative is carrying a debt I never acknowledged and that compounds in ways I cannot predict. I chose him for the wrong reason. I tested him. I built a case against him. I manipulated him into a structure that served me. I watched him develop something real with someone else, and I tried to make that into a problem. And then I left, and the leaving was the kindest thing I did in the entire marriage because at least the leaving was honest. He deserved better than the years before the leaving. Priya gives him better. I watched that on Instagram, and it is painful in the specific way that looking honestly at your own failures is painful, not dramatically, not with grief, just with the low, steady weight of understanding what you chose and what it cost someone who trusted you. I chose wrong. I know how. I know when. No. I know the names of every wrong turn. The knowing is not enough. The knowing is just the beginning of the doing differently. The doing differently is the part I am still in. I am in Denver. I am in therapy. I am trying to look at what is there. The morning light comes through the window. I make my coffee. I begin. Postscript 3 things I have stopped telling myself. 1, that I was lonely in my marriage because Nathan was insufficient. The accurate version is I was lonely in my marriage because I had stopped allowing the marriage to be the place where I brought my loneliness. I had started bringing it to Lucas instead, where it could be managed rather than addressed, contained rather than resolved. Nathan could not help me with loneliness I was not offering him. This is not his failure. 2, that opening the marriage was about growth. The accurate version is opening the marriage was about creating a structure in which I could do what I was already planning to do while maintaining the ability to call it something with a better name. I was not interested in Nathan's growth or my own. I was interested in access. The framing was a kindness I was doing myself rather than him. 3, that Lucas showed me what I actually wanted. The accurate version is Lucas showed me what I thought I wanted, which was the feeling of being found interesting by someone with no obligation to find me interesting. The feeling was real. What it pointed toward was not a different person, but a different version of myself, the version that could have created that feeling within the marriage, by being willing to be interesting rather than just interesting to be seen by. I could have been that person. I chose not to be, and then left when I could not find the person I had chosen not to be in the marriage I had been failing to inhabit. That is the accurate version of all three things. I am learning to say the accurate versions. It is slow, and I am not finished, but I have started. The end. Acknowledgement to whoever is reading this. If you recognize yourself in the inventory, the running list, the case you are building, the structure you are designing to justify the decision you have already made. I want to say one thing, which is not advice, because I am not qualified to give advice about anything except what I know from inside the specific mess I made. The conversation you are afraid to have is cheaper than the structure you are building to avoid it. Say the true thing to the person you love before the true thing costs them something they cannot recover. That's all. That is the whole thing. I wish I had known it earlier. I am telling it to you now so that you might. More postscript WC c/mnt/user-data/the_woman_I_was.txt. Part 21. What Denver looks like now. Denver in October is specific. The leaves on the trees along 13th Avenue go gold, and the air has the quality of something deciding to change the last warmth of summer, giving way to the first real cold. I walk to work most mornings. The pharmaceutical company's regional office is in the tech corridor downtown. A 20-minute walk from Cap Hill that I have been doing for 3 years, and that I have only recently started doing with any attention. I was not paying attention to my walks for most of the marriage. I was on my phone, or I was thinking about the next thing, or I was doing the mental work of maintaining the case and managing the situation and keeping track of the various threads I had running. Now I walk without my phone most mornings. I look at the avenue and the trees and the specific quality of the Denver light, which is different from any other city's light in a way that I cannot explain, except to say that altitude does something to how colors sit on surfaces. I have been in the city for 6 years. I have been noticing it for 4 months. This is a metaphor. I know it is a metaphor. I am not going to unpack it because I think it unpacks itself. The apartment in Cap Hill is mine. Not mine in the sense that I am happy in it. I am not unhappy in it, but happiness is not the right word yet. Mine in the sense that it is the space where I am doing the work, and the work is mine, and it is the first thing in a while that is honestly mine, rather than constructed from materials I chose for what they would make me appear to have. I cook now. Nathan was the cook in our marriage. He liked it was good. It made dinner most evenings while I was usually still finishing something for work. I had resented this at some point in the inventory period without being able to explain why I resented someone doing a thing I didn't want to do. Now I cook because I need to eat, and because the cooking requires me to be present for approximately 30 minutes in a way that is not available to me when I am thinking about the case I am no longer building. I am making pasta when Adrienne calls on a Thursday in October, and she asks how I am. And I tell her the accurate version, which includes I am doing okay. I had a good therapy session this week. I emailed Nathan about a conference, and he was kind about it. Sophie's question is still running in my head. Adrienne says, "What does it feel like doing the work?" I think about this seriously. I am standing at the stove with a wooden spoon in my hand, and the pasta is almost ready, and through my kitchen window, the Denver October is happening without any particular regard for what I am going through. I say, like, I found a room I've been walking past for 34 years and finally opened the door, and it's full of things I put there and didn't deal with. And she says, that sounds right. I say, it's a lot of things. She says, start with one. I put one thing at a time in the correct place. This is what the therapist calls processing. It is slower than building a case. It is more accurate. It does not produce the feeling of forward momentum that the case produced because the case was always moving toward something. The processing is not moving toward anything. It is just making the room habitable. I am making the room habitable. This is where I am. The pasta is done. The October light is doing the thing it does. The room is getting there. I begin again. Every day, I begin again. Part 22, the photograph I kept. Among the 412 wedding photographs, I kept 3. Not all of them I could not keep. All of them, the keeping felt dishonest, given everything but 3. The first is from the ceremony. Nathan and I are facing each other at the altar in the Botanic Gardens with the May light behind us, and we are both clearly emotional in different ways. I am trying not to cry because I do not want to ruin my makeup, which is a very me thing to be thinking about in that moment. Nathan is not trying not to cry. He is just looking at me with the unguarded expression of someone who is feeling the full weight of the moment and is not managing it. In this photograph, I look like I am attending something important. He looks like he is inside it. I kept this one because it is accurate. The second is from the dinner reception, not the candid one with me looking away, but an earlier one from before the dinner started when Nathan and I were outside in the garden for a few minutes alone between the ceremony and the guests' arrival. Someone caught us without our knowing. I am talking and Nathan is listening, and for once in the photographs, we are both in the same place. Whatever I was saying required his full attention, and he was giving it, and I was giving it back by believing in that moment that he deserved to hear it. I kept this one because I want to remember that we had some of this, that it was real at some point, that I had access to it and chose eventually not to go back to it. The third is not from the wedding. It is from the day we moved into the Cap Hill apartment 18 months before we got married. We are both in moving clothes, covered in dust, sitting on the floor of the empty living room, eating pizza from the box. Nathan has a smear of something on his face paint, probably from the wall we had been trying to touch up. I am laughing at something he has just said. He is looking at the pizza, not at the camera, because neither of us knew anyone was taking the picture. In this photograph, I look like someone who is exactly where she wants to be. I kept this one because I know that the person in that photograph was real, that I was capable of being exactly where I wanted to be, that I am still capable of it somewhere if I can figure out how to want the right things for the right reasons. I am working on it. I keep the photograph on my phone, I look at it. Sometimes I look at what is there. I begin. Denver, Colorado, October. The work continues. The light is good. The pasta is ready. Sophie was right. Looking at what is there usually helps. Begin. The woman I was when I thought I knew better is not the only woman I am. She is the one I am working from. The work is mine. Denver is mine. The morning light through the kitchen window is mine. The photograph of the empty apartment and the pizza and the laugh that did not know it was being captured is mine. That is enough to build from. That will always be enough to build from. Begin. I chose Nathan for the wrong reason. I chose Lucas for the wrong reason. The right reason is something I am still finding the shape of. I think it begins with knowing that what I was measuring with was the wrong instrument and ends with building a better one. I think it involves being willing to be present with the person I am with rather than measuring the distance to something else. I think it involves saying the true thing earlier and more often than is comfortable. I am 34. I have time to practice. I intend to practice. That is the story. That is all of it. That is enough. Denver, October. The pasta is getting cold. I am going to eat it and then call Adrienne and then open the window and let the autumn air in. The room is getting habitable, one thing at a time, one honest thing at a time. This is the work. This is mine. Begin. The window is open. Sophie was right. Nathan is in Washington Park. Priya is with him. The photograph of the empty apartment is on my phone. The morning light in Denver in October does something specific to the color of the trees on 13th Avenue that I have been walking past for 3 years without seeing. I am seeing it now. I am seeing what is there. That is the beginning. That is always. Always the beginning.